Hello and welcome to this round 4 here at GP Sydney. The players just shuffling up. We will get the names updated for you there because there are some big names in this feature match area. On the left of our screen, that is Hall of Famer Mr. Kenji Samura. On the right, there we have Jon Finkel. Between them, these guys have had some of the biggest successes in Pro Tour history. I mean, both of these guys were slam dunks in their respective years for getting into the Hall of Fame. Jon Finkel has had such good performances since getting to the Hall of Fame that I think he could probably have got in twice over.
Yeah, arguably the best Magic player of all time. Certainly the most accomplished player. But Kenji Samura, especially during his prime, about 10 years ago already, was one of the most feared, if not the most feared player on the Pro Tour. Hailing from Japan, he has been dominating the Magic scene for quite a while.
Yeah, both these players getting a bit of a warm-up before the Pro Tour, and we can see sort of Jon Finkel kicking things off here with Thraben Inspector, getting a clue from that. In the meantime, the way that Kenji Samura is drawing extra cards, that a Terrarian enabling him to both fix his mana a bit, draw a card, but also critically get an artifact into the graveyard such that later on Delirium will be a factor. And in green-black, Delirium is a big feature.
Yeah, those are the Delirium colors. Lots of cards in those two colors that just get better when you have 4 different card types in your graveyard. But hey, Jon Finkel also seems to like his Delirium, as he played a Crop Sigil, so that mills the top card of your library at the beginning of each of your turns. And once you have Delirium, well, then you can sacrifice it to get a nice Bombi creature, perhaps, back from your graveyard.
Yeah, you get a land as well, so it's kind of a slow 2 for 1. There we can see it. In the meantime, though, getting down an additional creature on the board, a perfectly nice one. And artifact creatures kind of important to the overall Delirium plan. We see them on both sides of the table. Part of the reason they're so good, they represent both an artifact and a creature. But if you're looking for an absolute all-star when it comes to Delirium, Kenji Samura has it. Up there on the top of our screen, that one's Mindrak Demon.
Yep, 4/5 flying, and it has a downside when you don't have Delirium yet, but it looks like Kenji has an artifact, a land, a creature, and an instant. That looks to be a Black Murder there in his graveyard. So that is just a 4/5 flyer for 4 mana. That is an amazing deal. And that Runaway Carriage on Jon Finkel's side of the board, it's a 5/6. It can block any ground creatures and trade for them, but not going to be able to reach up into the sky and take down that Mindrak Demon.
Yeah, I mean, the downside, of course, of that Runaway Carriage, once you send it attacking or blocking, it will run away.
Oh, yeah.
It will go to your graveyard, but
it's flavorful.
If you're looking to make Delirium that, not necessarily the end of the world, though. As we've stated, having an artifact in the graveyard, not the worst. But Finkel here, playing it a little bit cagey. He's got more creatures on the battlefield, even if he doesn't have too much right now to deal with the one creature hitting the red zone, that one being the Mindrak Demon.
Back with Survivalist on both sides of the battlefield. Jon's is just a 4/3, whereas Kenji's is currently a 5/4. With Trample, thanks to the Delirium bonus, but Kenji's won't be able to attack profitably into the Runaway Carriage. Ulvenwald Captive is the card that Kenji just added to the battlefield. Arguably the best green common in Eldritch Moon. It's just a 2 mana elf. Well, it's not really an elf, it's more like still a werewolf.
Like a werebear, maybe.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, taps for mana, but also you can pay 7 mana to transform it, at which point it's a gigantic creature that taps for, well, 2 colorless rather than just the 1 green.
And all that excess mana may also be put to good use, as Kenji can turn his 2/2 defender into a 4-power flying attacker. So at this point, Jon is pretty far behind. He doesn't have any great attacks. Sure, he can attack with his back with Survivalist, but Kenji will just trade it for his copy of the card, if Kenji is interested at least. And Jon does not have any defense against Kenji's flyers. So at this point, Kenji is ahead.
Now, a couple of interesting cards in Jon Finkel's hand. It looks like he's got an Ulvenwald Observer kicking back in there, and that's one that potentially could swing things a little bit. It's a 6/6 that whenever a creature you control with a toughness of 4 or greater dies, you get to draw a card. So it kind of doesn't mind too much if the carriage rolls on through. But for now, Jon Finkel on 5 mana is just figuring out exactly what he wants to do there. There's Ulvenwald Captive on one side of the board, and you know what? Finkel says, I like that plan, I'm going to get one of them as well. So starting off as a 1/2 with Defender, but not too big a worry. It'll mean that Ulvenwald Observer can be cast this very next turn.
Also during the attack, interestingly, it seemed that Kenji double blocked the Backwood Survivalist with his own as well as his 2/2. Now, that is an unusual play because the Backwood Survivalists could just trade by themselves. I believe that Kenji lined up his second blocker because he may have been afraid of a combat trick like Woodcutter's Grid that would give +3/+3 to Jon Finkel's creature. So if Kenji wants to play around that, that double block made sense so that he would be able to take down Jon's 4/3 for sure.
So we see there on the left of our screen, that is Kenji Samura, looking pretty chilled out. He's the one that's got the powerful flyer that's going to be difficult to answer on his side of the board. But a little stat for you here. I know that you do love your statistics. We have 22 Pro Tour top 8s between these two players. Yeah. So Finkel has 16, which is by far the most Pro Tour top 8s of any player in the history of the Pro Tour. Kenji Samura, by comparison, only 6, but 6 Pro Tour top 8s still makes him one of the players with the most Pro Tour top 8s in the history of the Pro Tour.
Yeah, these numbers are mind-boggling. Many players haven't even played 22 Grand Prix in their life, let alone 22 Pro Tour Pro Tours. And well, if you added up Pro Tour top 8s, it's even way more difficult. These are two masters of the game, so the plays they make, they're well thought out and they make sense.
Well, if we're talking about powerful cards being played, while Mindrak Demon might be the largest flyer on the board, Gisela the Broken Blade, certainly no slouch. A 4/3 flying lifelink first striker. It will not take too much in the way of combat tricks or pump for it to be able to deal with Mindrak Demon, and just the lifelink on it means that a straightforward race for Kenji Samura now looking a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, Kenji can still attack with his demon and potentially make it even bigger with that cultist staff, but yeah, thanks to the lifelink, that's not going to work by itself. Instead, a 6/6 Geist-fueled Scarecrow crashing in.
Yeah, the Scarecrow, a natural 4/4 that can be played in any deck, but it does mean that your other creatures are going to cost 1 more to cast. So, not without drawbacks, but it's one that I found that thus far in this limited format pretty powerful. There, Finkel respecting it and just sticking his Thraben Inspector in the way. It's done its work. And a transformation there from Jon Finkel, now meaning that his Eldrazi looking a little bit more powerful. The Extricator of Sin, once it's transformed, it gives all of your Eldrazi vigilance, and you can pay 2 colorless and tap it, sacrificing a non-Eldrazi to put another 3/2 colorless Eldrazi horror onto the battlefield. So potentially a source of quite a few creatures in play there for Jon Finkel. In the meantime, though, he does need to still contend with Mindrak Demon that came down pretty early in the game and is just carried on trucking ever since.
Well, the Gisela is effectively keeping the Mindrak Demon at bay. Not that Gisela can block the Mindrak Demon, but hey, if Kenji attacks with his Mindrak Demon, then Jon can attack back with Gisela and basically gain back all the life while dealing 4 damage in the process.
Yeah, lifelink creating all kinds of crazy races, but Jon Finkel not looking to content himself with just that, continuing to add to his board, and this kind of a nice addition here.
Gavony Unhallowed. It starts off as a 2/4, but whenever a creature on your side of the battlefield dies, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Now, Jon aggressively moving in with his Extricator of Flesh. Remember, Eldrazi you control have vigilance. He's saying, hey, if you want to perhaps trade for this Eldrazi 3/2 token, then my Gavony Unhallowed will become bigger. I wasn't really going to use this 3/2 token anyway, and this Gavony Unhallowed, well, it may just grow out of bounds.
And of course, Gavony Unhallowed, much easier to grow when you already have Extricator of Flesh in play, because you can just sacrifice creatures to make more Eldrazi. We saw there a Boon of Emrakul after combat, able to finish off Mindrak Demon, and now Jon Finkel looking in commanding position. Even though the life total's 12 apiece, the air is looking considerably clearer, and that's a bit of a problem when Gisela is on Jon Finkel's side of the board.
Does Jon have 2 black? It looks like he played Gavony Unhallowed and Boon of Emrakul with only 1 swamp on the same turn.
Might be something we just need to check on there. In the meantime, though, it looks like this play is continuing. Gisela getting killed off by a sudden death there from Kenji Samura.
Yeah, it may just be, well, a natural error that neither of the players got. This can happen, especially when you're still a bit jet-lagged, as many of the pros who flew into Sydney are.
Yeah, that certain death does mean that Kenji Samura up to 14 life, in addition to killing a powerful mythic rare, draining 2 points of life from Jon Finkel. But Finkel now chooses to deploy his Ulvenwald Observer, so that 6/6 will mean that whenever a creature with toughness 4 or greater dies under his control, he's going to draw a card. And there's a few good creatures that may yet hit the graveyard sometime fairly soon. 7 mana available to Finkel, such that he can transform his little werewolf into a big Eldrazi werewolf at some point also.
Yep. Yeah, at the moment it looks like Jon doesn't have great attacks. He would just, well, basically jump attack his creature into the 6/6 on Kenji's side of the battlefield. But on the next turn, with the Ulvenwald Observer in the mix, it is quite likely that Jon can set up a reasonable attack. Meanwhile, well, Kenji has the option of transforming his Straben Gargoyle into a 4/2 flyer, potentially putting a lot of pressure on Jon. But if Kenji goes for that play, he is actually dead on board, because he has to tap his Ulvenwald Captive for the 6th mana. That would leave him with only 1 blocker, which is not enough to survive Finkel's attack. Kenji's just checking the backside of the card to make sure what it does. It is a 4/2 flying over there.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the temptation to think, well, you know, maybe there's a few extra abilities even above and beyond, but
Kenji had the 6th land, so that means he didn't have to tap his Ulvenwald Captive to activate this. And for that reason, he is not dead on the swingback yet.
So Finkel there activating his Extricator of Flesh, has to sacrifice a creature to do so, but replaces it immediately with an Eldrazi, and that Eldrazi will have Vigilance. Thanks
and he
to
gets to draw a card in the process. That's the reason why he made that play, due to the Ulvenwald Observer. Jon might need to draw an answer to that flyer, and he did, in the form of Deadweight, basically the perfect card for Finkel to draw in this spot.
So in comes the Observer. It's a 6/6, so kind of demanding some sort of response, and gets the trade there. An additional card for Jon Finkel, and Jon draws a way of getting back a creature from the graveyard, and there's a few good options there.
Yep. But well, he is still bottlenecked on black mana. Can only cast 1 black card this turn, and chooses to get rid of the 4/2 flyer, which makes sense. If you don't kill it now and Kenji has any kind of pump spell, you would just lose on the next turn. So that weight over Cemetery Recruitment makes a lot of sense. Also, Jon currently has 7 mana up, including the Ulvenwald Captive to transform it into the 4/6. And Kenji, well, he was looking in a fine spot on the previous turn, but thanks to that deadweight, the tables have turned.
I mean, we've seen the tables turn a number of times just in this game here between these two heavyweights of the game.
Yeah, and Kasich Dire Swine means that we may be heading into a bit of a board stall, as Jon now doesn't have any good attacks into the humongous 6/6. And, well, Kenji probably also won't be able to attack with his 6/6 into, well, 2 high toughness blockers that can line up a fine double block.
If only there was a way of getting Gisela back.
Oh, yes. Well, she's not a zombie. Or at least she isn't, right? Never know with all these
Yeah.
Eldrazi influences, but no, Gisela is not a zombie, so John doesn't get to draw a card for free with that cemetery recruitment, but hey, getting back Gisela is quite the big deal in this particular board state.
Yeah, plenty of powerful cards in Jon Finkel's deck. Being able to get back, any of them would have been fairly good, but Gisela is a very, very powerful Magic card indeed. Tricky enough to deal with once, and now he's really asking the question of Kenji Samura, can you deal with this twice? You see there Kenji just thinking about his plays a little bit. While he's currently leading life total 14-6, it won't take too long for Gisela to turn that right around, lifelink being a big deal.
That's a fine answer. Certain death.
That's the second certain death that we've seen from Kenji Samura. This one foil. And the 2 points of life drain here, pretty relevant also. Finkel not got too much life to work with.
Yeah, putting Finkel down to 4 life means that a transformed Ulvenwald captive potentially on the next turn would be a lethal attacker. And well, Kenji has Delirium, so that Keswick Dire Swine has Trample. It all adds up. I would say that Finkel is still ahead in this game, but by a small margin, especially considering his life total.
Yeah, it looks like he's just looking at using Extricator of Sin here to sacrifice Gisela, or at least to mitigate against the life drain there coming from certain death.
Yeah, and also to get the 3 to Eldrazi. The problem is that he will have to tap his 4/6 to do so, meaning that his blocks may not be as profitable, right? Because Kenji can turn his Swine into an 8/8. Then John will have to, well, essentially jump block. But if that were to happen, then John can also attack back for a lot of damage, potentially even set up a lethal attack. And Kenji apparently is not interested in that exchange. Also, Kenji would need 3 mana to equip the Cultist Staff, so Kenji would have had to have an additional land in order to make that play I mentioned.
Wow, the rares just keep on coming here for Jon Finkel. Tireless Tracker coming down, immediately followed by a land in order to get a clue. The Tireless Tracker, I mean, we've seen it played a lot in Standard, and it does have the potential to get fairly out of hand fairly quickly. There we can see it. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you get to investigate, and whenever you sacrifice a clue, which is exactly what we see Jon Finkel doing right there, then that Tireless Tracker is going to get larger.
Yep, and what this means is, well, John can now sit back, relax, build up his defenses. He doesn't have to make overly aggressive plays that might expose him to some pump spells or removal spells so that Kenji suddenly sets up a lethal attack. If the game goes long and Kenji doesn't find an answer for the Tireless Tracker, that stream of steady card advantage will eventually, well, almost certainly hand Jon Finkel the game. So yeah, you're in a tough spot here if you are Kenji. Sure, you can transform the Ulvenwald captive, attack with both creatures, but John can just line up some blocks, attack back for a lot of damage, so that's not really going to work. If you're Kenji, you need, well, A, an answer for Tireless Tracker in order to stop that constant card advantage, and B, some kind of evasion. Kenji had some flyers earlier in the game, they were all answered by John's removal spells. But in this particular situation, Kenji really needs to find one, or maybe something like a cemetery recruitment to get one back.
And we see just at the bottom of Jon Finkel's screen there, the other green rare that he played last turn, Emrakul's Evangel, just kind of waving from the bottom of our screen there with his strange tentacled arm. Yet another way for Jon Finkel to get more Eldrazi into play, and because of Extricator of Flesh, all of those Eldrazi have Vigilance and potentially represent the ability to both attack and block, should John so choose.
There's the Bloodbriar for even more value when you sacrifice, well, any permanent, or in this case, creatures. It'll get a +1/+1 counter for, well, any card you sacrifice. Starts off as a 2/3.
Yeah,
Perfectly serviceable green 3-drop.
With Tireless Tracker on the board, though, so many clues potentially getting sacrificed as well. Jon Finkel, just at the moment seems to be playing a theme deck. It feels to me like, if anything, Gisela is a little bit off theme. Obviously, we'll give her a pass because she's very, very powerful indeed. But so many sacrifice synergies in this deck for Jon Finkel. He's not going with the traditional emerge route. We haven't really seen too much of that from him, but everything that he's been doing does seem to be working very well with the likes of Bloodbriar, which you see on screen there, with the likes of Emeralds of Angel working with Extricator of the Flesh. I mean, this is a powerful set of options, and Kenji forcing the question a little bit here, playing a deadweight on that Emeralds of Angel in order to make sure that if it's going to get used, it's not going to get used for more than a small amount of value.
Yeah, this is not the card that Kenji needed for this spot. What he essentially did was, well, he left Jon Finkel with the exact same board state, except with a counter on the Bloodbriar.
And with an extra vigilance on one of his creatures where previously he did not have vigilance.
That as well. Yeah, it seems like Jon is building up such an insane board state where Kenji just has no way of breaking through. Sure, Kenji can still attack with one of his monsters. Now gets, it's a 3/2 vigilance thanks to the cultist staff. It's a 5/4 vigilance. But still, without evasion, Kenji is not breaking through Jon's defenses. And eventually, if the game progresses in this fashion and the Tireless Tracker keeps drawing cards one by one, then, well, at some point it is likely that Jon has, 10 creatures to Kenji's 3 and Jon can just attack with all of his creatures. That said, well, maybe there's still an evasive creature in Kenji's deck, or some other sweet bomb that might allow him to break through. But currently Jon is quite far ahead in this game.
Yeah, quite far would almost be an understatement here. We see, that is a choking...
It's a choking restraints. So that means that the Kessig Dire Swine can no longer attack or block. Jon can spend 5 mana to exile it, which probably is not too relevant here, but could matter for things like Delirium or to prevent activated abilities from that creature. And it looks like this is going to be a lethal attack. Yeah, Jon could attack with all of his creatures. 5 would be unblocked. That would be lethal, and Kenji was tapped out. So Kenji also sees it, respects Jon Finkel, and scoops up the cards.
Just a fantastic game one there. So much back and forth. And I think that when we saw this pairing, we very much hoped that we were going to see a good match, and we've definitely had that delivered thus far. I mean, the one worry always is that it doesn't matter how many Pro Tours you've top 8'd, how many wins that you've had. Every now and again, one player either opens a pool that they can't really get too much going with, or has a slightly ropey draw. In this case, not the case for either of these players.
Yeah, both players have excellent decks. If you looked at, let's start with Jon Finkel's deck. He had, some good bombs. Gisela is perhaps the single best card in Eldritch Moon, along with some good ground defenses, some removal spells, some ways to get his bombs back from the graveyard. His mana base seemed to be working out, which can sometimes be an issue for 3-color decks, but it seemed to be doing okay. So Jon's deck looks fine to me. Meanwhile, Kenji's deck, well, Kenji may not have as many, let's say, rare bombs as Jon had, because ultimately the game came down to the Tireless Tracker from Jon that took over. Kenji's deck is built more around synergy, it seems like, around Delirium, milling cards into your graveyard, getting some small incremental bonuses on your creatures, and, well, just trying to leverage those in the mid game. Kenji was falling a bit behind in the late game, but before that his deck was doing quite well. Yeah, and
we saw a couple of removal spells from him there. We saw a couple of copies of Certain Death, and that one, yes, it's expensive. 6 mana is kind of high watermark in terms of killing off a creature, but the fact that it can unconditionally kill any creature, and you get the little bit of extra value from the life drain, certainly of value. But I mean, so many stats about these two players. Jon Finkel, he's done it all at various stages. He's been the world champion. He's won Pro Tours. He's currently leading on Draftmaster, such that even if his pro points tally wasn't enough to get him to the world championship, he could potentially do so just off drafting.
Interestingly, as the game 2 is getting underway, Kenji chose to put Jon Finkel on the play. Often you still want to play first in Seal deck, but when you don't see lots of werewolves on the other side, and you see a 3-color mana base and a game that might go long, putting your opponent on the play so that you get 1 extra card is worthwhile, and Kenji chose to go for that.
Well, we see some very powerful 2-drops in the early game here from both these players. Noose Constrictor struggles to find many creatures that are better than it at 2 mana, but Grim Flayer certainly has an argument in that regard. If it had hung around, it's one of the very powerful Delirium payoff cards. Once you've got Delirium, it's a 4/4, and it gets you there too, because when it deals combat damage, it gets to let you fix the top cards of your deck a little bit. But Tireless Tracker now down for Jon Finkel as well. There we see the Grim Flayer. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you look at the top 3 and you can put any number of them in the graveyard and the rest back. Samura, though, has the removal in this game too in order to deal with 2 very powerful rares that have come from Jon Finkel. This is exactly what he needed to happen in the early game in order to try and punish Jon Finkel's deck that he knows has a lot of power.
Absolutely. Jon had an awesome start with both of these rare, bomb creatures, in a sense. If Kenji would have just had a curve of regular creatures, I don't think Kenji would be even in this game. But because Kenji had 2 removal spells, the game becomes close. He just traded his common removal spells for Jon's rare bombs, and now we're just playing a regular game of Magic with some swines involved.
Yeah, Ulvenwald Captive there, accelerating out the Kessig Dire Swine. It's a natural 6/6, which is perfectly fine. With Delirium, it gains Trample, but these guys trading blows in terms of removal. They're Choking Restraints perfectly fine on a Kessig Dire Swine.
Oh yes.
At some point, could get sacrificed in order to exile the Big Pig, and getting the enchantment into the graveyard, not worth nothing. There's the possibility of Ironclad Slayer to get it back at some point.
Well, and here you see one reason why Choking Restraints is not as good in this format as it might have been in other formats. Emerge. Kenji was able to sacrifice his, Big Pig for an Abundant Maw. That's a 6/4, there you see it on the screen, with a 3-point life drain attached to it when you cast it. So that's not only a big creature on the battlefield, but it only cost him 1 black mana because he just sacrificed the Kessig Dire Swine that was already locked down with the enchantment. So Kenji was not too scared of that Choking Restraints.
So a big transformation, and now some swings from Kenji Samura. Life totals 23-9. Jon Finkel on the ropes here, but activating Vessel of Nascency sees some great ones to get back. He can potentially do cool things with his Ironclad Slayer. That's the reason that he's checking out his graveyard there. If nothing else, in principle, in a longer game, he might get back a Vessel of Nascency. In practice here, though, looking at a different card there, Ulvenwald Observer. We saw it in game 1. Runaway Carriage, the big card on the board there. We see the 5/6 Trampler, but that one won't necessarily stay around for too long. But with Ulvenwald Observer in play, it will be one that when it dies, he can draw a card.
Yeah, I like taking the Ulvenwald Observer there over the Ironclad Slayer, in part because Kenji is now threatening 2 4/6s, and that 6/6 can just hold off both, whereas the Ironclad Slayer, possibly with the Choking Restraints returned from the graveyard, can only deal with 1, and then you're stuck with, say, a 3/2 that doesn't really do as much on the board. Yeah, and Kenji, he has no good attacks. His Abundant Maw would just trade for the Runaway Carriage. His 4/6s, they can't attack into the 6/6 Ulvenwald Observer, and just means that Kenji will have to pass the turn and watch as, Jon plays some more rares. Soul Swallower, Emrakul's Evangel, rares for days, and then Crop Sigil to get some back when they die. He has a plan.
Yeah, I mean, he has a plan. He also appears to be playing, if not all of his rares, very close to it in this 3-color deck.
Yeah, there was Gisela, there was the Tireless Tracker, there's now Soul Swallower, Emrakul's Evangel. That's already 4. That's not
Grim
too bad.
Flayer.
Oh, Grim Flayer, 5.
Have we got the Ulvenwald Observer?
Oh, no, yeah, that's 6. And all our creatures, meaning that Crop Sigil and the Cemetery Recruitment, which can get them back, are top-notch as well. Yeah, it's a deck with no shortage of awesome creatures.
But at the moment, I mean, there's 2 common creatures in play for Kenji Samura that are just gigantic, and 1 uncommon creature that's not far behind. We got a couple of 4/6s and a 6/4, and a huge amount of mana available for Kenji Samura if he wants to cast more big threats. I mean, this is a real game that we got going on here.
Yeah, but Kenji does not have a lot of time. Sure, John is at a lower life total, but John is quite far ahead on board, and that Soul Swallower is just gaining 3+1/+1 counters every turn because John has Delirium. So if the game state stays like this for several additional turns, then that Soul Swallower is going to get out of control. This means that Kenji will have to, well, undertake something. As I mentioned, Kenji still doesn't have great attacks into John's board, so he'll just have to sit here and watch as, of course, Gisela comes down. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you need to commit some rares to the board.
There's 1, 2, 3, 4 rare/mythics. Maybe a 5th one if John sacrifices the Crop Sigil. You should get a prize if you have 6 on the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, I think that realistically John Finkel must have been looking at this pool and thinking, I'm going to get some prizes from this GP somewhere.
So certain death, well, it just gets countered by the Emrakul's Evangel, but hey, Gisela down for just a little while before it is returned with the Crop Sigil. And that Soul Swallower ticking up and up, currently 12/12.
And it does have trample, so it's not as if Kenji Samura can just deploy small creatures to the battlefield in terms of putting them in the way.
No, but John is also in no rush. He has all his defenses locked up. He's still at 9 life, that's high enough. And Kenji, most importantly, does not have any evasion. Kenji does have some flying creatures in his deck, but so far none are showing up.
Yeah, Terrarian there, not quite the play. It's a slow way even of drawing you an additional card.
15/15 Soul Swallower for the time being. And Kenji has, let's see, 6, 8, 12, 16 power on the battlefield. So I think that Soul Swallower will still chill back for another turn. No point in attacking yet, I guess, although that Gisela should be able to get in there.
And even 1 hit from Gisela here, very important, simply because of the life it's going to gain John Finkel. On 9, he has to still be a little bit worried that there could be some big play from the other side of the table from Kenji Samura. But, yeah, once he's in double digits, not quite so bad.
The triple block. Love it. By triple blocking, Kenji plays around, say, 1 instant speed removal spell from John Finkel or some kind of combat trick. Sure, you give John the opportunity to line up to possibly take down the Abundant Maw, which gives him more options, but you just want to be sure that you take down the Ulvenwald Observer here.
And another Ulvenwald captive hitting the battlefield, this time for John Finkel. He's got the mana to transform it immediately if he so chooses. Kenji digs with Terrarian.
Vexing Scuttler. That's not too bad. It's one of the new Emerge creatures that allows you to get back an instant or sorcery from the graveyard. He has certain death there, so that will allow him to get back an answer for the Soul Swallower, which is currently 15/15. And, well, Kenji still doesn't have a way to deal with Gisela, but at least it buys him some time.
Now, the interesting thing is that he didn't really have a great creature to sacrifice there to emerge, so instead just decides to pay 8.
Yeah, if he would have sacrificed one of the 4/6s, it counts as 2, because Ulvenwald Captive, which is the other side, is 2 mana. So yeah, he didn't have an option of playing Vexing Scuttler and then casting the Certain Death. And that may actually prove to be fatal for Kenji, because that, what is it now, 18 trample? Oh, it will attack. That I'm sure of. Maybe it will fall to a Certain Death on the next turn, but I mean, Kenji already has to line up some jump blocks for it.
And by some, we potentially mean his board.
Yeah, like if John attacks with everything, maybe Kenji actually has to triple jump block the Soul Swallower to even survive. Let's see, 4, 5,
and
or I think John might even have lethal on the battlefield already. Yeah, especially with this getting back the Ironclad Slayer, which gets back the Choking Restraints, takes out another blocker. Yeah, we don't even have to do the math. This was lethal.
Yeah, occasionally, every now and again, being able to jam into the red zone and go, "I've got this. We don't need to add it up. It's just a fact of life, or indeed death, I suppose." Is a big play there from Jon Finkel, able to take that one down with relative ease, it must be said, in the later stages. I mean, Kenji Samura definitely put up a great fight. I mean, his deck has an awful lot going for it, but my word, the amount of power in that deck from Jon Finkel. I mean, he's got to have had those 3 buys just kind of wishing, yeah, I just want to make some people feel it. Like this deck is going to win a lot of rounds.
His deck looks awesome. The only possible problem with the deck that I can see right now is that he has a 3-color mana base, right? He wants to play Grim Flayer on turn 2, and then maybe Gisela on turn 4. That's a lot of different colors of mana. I did see a Warped Landscape to possibly help out a little bit with the mana fixing. But basically the power is there. I like that he added some of the ways to get creature cards back from his graveyard, because all of his creatures are so awesome. He has some removal spells to answer the opposing threats. This would be the type of deck where I wouldn't even be against playing, say, 19 lands, just to make sure that you hit all your colors of mana. Especially with Tireless Tracker in the late game, those lands are going to be useful. As always in Seal deck, opening good rares and mythics helps, but you also have to construct the deck in a proper way, and I'm sure that John, with all of his experience and skill, has done that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned 19 lands. Just for the people at home, under more normal circumstances in a 40-card deck, we would be looking at 17 maybe 18. This an unusual circumstance where the cards are so powerful that you're willing to be a little bit flooded on mana here and there, just so you know that you're going to be able to cast them.
Exactly. It is worth it when the power of your deck is that high. But yeah, when John gets to the late game, his card quality is through the roof, and well, basically, if at the beginning of the day you would have told me, okay, Jon Finkel is going 9-0 at this at day 1 of this GP, I would have said, well, sure, I believe that. It's Jon Finkel, the best Magic player ever. But now looking at his deck and all the sweet cards that he opened, I could get behind that statement even more.
There's going to be a lot of people that have to worry just a touch about facing up against that one, because even a deck with a lot of removal, which Kenji Samura had, there were just so many powerful threats that he wasn't able to deal with. It's the last one that gets you.
Yes. Yeah, there were 6, 2 ways to get him back. Yeah, even the best Seal decks don't have that much removal. The best way of beating Jon Finkel is to just race him. Play a 2-drop, a 3-drop, a 4-drop, have a nice curve, maybe a removal spell on turn 5, a combat trick on turn 6. Hope that Finkel stumbles a bit on his mana base. That is how you can beat even seemingly strong Seal decks. It is not always about the powerful rares or mythics. Sure, if you head into the very late game, it may be, but just having a consistent 2-color deck with a mana curve, with some combat tricks, pushing the offense, that is still a perfectly viable way of constructing your deck, and you can beat even seemingly more powerful decks that way.
Well, we've already had one fantastic main course this round. We're going to get dessert in the form of Game 3, the deciding game between Tomohiro Saito and Justin Cohen. Saito, of course, a Pro Tour winner and one of the people who's hotly being talked about in terms of a potential Hall of Fame berth. Justin Cohen, he's already got a Pro Tour finals under his belt and is a fine player in his own right. One of a variety of players who are worth watching out for on the
And remember that Tomohiro Saito is here for the Grand Prix Master slot. He's 1 point behind Brian Braun-Duin. If Saito manages to surpass BBD, he will earn a qualification for the World Championships. So a lot on the line for him here.
Well, I mean, he looks like he's got the tools to do it here. Able to get early attacks in with Kessig Prowler and that Noose Constrictor. Following up with...
Wow.
Yeah,
this almost looks like a constructed deck. This is going so fast. It's just turn 3, and Justin is already down to 14 life, facing down 7 power worth of creatures.
Well, 7 power at least, depending on whether or not that Noose Constrictor wants to grow just a little bit. Ingenious Scub, the play for Justin Cohen, and that a fine blocker. I mean, it's got great stats for its cost, but at the same time, all of Saito's creatures they can quite happily rumble into the red zone if he so chooses, and it's not as if he's out of gas. It looks like there's an Emrakul's boon in hand here, and that could mean that there's going to be another uncontested attack from the Japanese pro. We could have a very quick game here.
Yep. Saito also has the option of casting Haunted Dead and then attacking with only his Noose Constrictor and Traben Foulbloods. But I like pushing through here. That boon is an excellent answer for the Ingenious Scarf one way or another. And being able to attack with your 2-1, not giving Justin an opportunity to trade for any of your creatures yet. I love putting down Justin down to 7 life. And note that if Justin doesn't have anything to play on this turn, right? If he would have a stumbling draw, he would be dead by turn 5. That's just incredible for limited. That's so fast, we rarely see that.
Enlightened Maniac here, the play for Cohen, and in blue-green I would have to assume that his is a deck that's going to be heavily leaning on Emerge. We can see that there's potentially a couple of Emerge cards in hand. The Maniac, fantastic in that plan, but it may just be that there's simply not time to really get that going, as I can't see an earthly reason why Saito would slow down his pace of attacking here, even though in this point he is securing trades a little more rather than just dealing damage. With just 7 more points of damage left to deal, this is a very, very impressive position for him.
Yes, Saito did not have the 5th land, which would have allowed him to transform his Keswick Prowler into a 4-4. So this attack, Justin now has 2 options. Well, Justin definitely has to block, and it makes sense to trade the 3 to Eldrazi for any of Saito's creatures. Justin could put it in front of the Traben Foulbloods, the 3-2, that's a fair exchange, a fair trade. But then Justin will also have to chump block the Noose Constrictor, which threatens to become a 5-5 just by discarding 3 cards. Saito has 3 cards in hand. Alternatively, Justin could block with his Eldrazi Scion on the Noose Constrictor, taking it down, but then that's not the best exchange. You still fall down to 2 life. So Justin goes for the trade, the 3-2s, and chump block the Noose Constrictor. It's fair enough, but he does lose his Maniac that might have allowed him to emerge on his own turn. Now those emerge creatures are pretty much stuck in his hand.
Yeah, and Haunted Dead meaning that Tomohiro Saito has an additional evasive creature. I mean, 1/1's not large, but when your opponent's on 5 life, it's frequently going to prove to be good enough. Just the 1 creature coming down here for Justin Cohen, and it's a little bit taxed here.
Well, fortunately it has a useful ability. This is Tangleclaw Werewolf, the 2-4 that can block an additional creature each combat. So if Saito attacks with all of his creatures, Cohen could block the Keswick Prowler and the Noose Constrictor. In fact, he has to do that if he wants to survive this attack. And then, well, Justin still falls down to 2 life. He loses his Werewolf. Yeah, I don't see a good way for Justin to get out of this, most likely.
Now, something that you don't see happening too often there, ordering of attackers.
Yeah, to indicate where the Tangleclaw Werewolf would deal damage. Well, Justin says want to deal the damage to the Noose Constrictor, so Saito happily obliges, discards a card, and that will do it.
Yep, quick game there for Tomohiro Saito. He started off with 3 buys, as did all of our players in the feature match area. This a feature match area studded with talent. Only half of them were able to walk away with a win. I mean, presumably they'd have been happier playing against someone that they weren't as aware of by reputation quite so much. But Saito still trucking in his race to pick up the appropriate GP points to potentially lock up a World Championship slot.
Yeah, and of course the field is quite stacked, especially near the top tables, because so many of the top pro players who are going to be here for the Pro Tour, also next weekend here in Sydney, don't miss it. Yeah, they already flew over here for the GP.
But that's the end of this round 4. We'll be back soon enough with round 5 here at GP Sydney.
In the art of Magic the Gathering Innistrad, terror falls from the skies on blood-spattered wings. These pages, lavishly illustrated with the award-winning art of Magic the Gathering, are your entry into a world beset by terrible evils on all sides and betrayed by the hope it held most dear. On sale now. Put your game to the test at a Grand Prix. These Magic celebrations are headlined by 2-day open tournaments with